This story came in from someone who said that I could call her Cam, and she said this took place in 2012. In 2012, Cam said that she was home from college for the summer, as was her boyfriend. She said that the one thing that they loved to do all summer was boating. That was their thing. They lived near the water. If they weren't working, they were on the water. Now, because they were always on the water, her boyfriend ends up reconnecting with this guy who she says we can call Dan. Dan lives on a big property right by the public boat launch. Cam said that her boyfriend knew Dan from like middle school, but hadn't seen him since like 8th grade. So they end up reconnecting with Dan, and since Dan really enjoys going out on the water and they really enjoy going out on the water, they end up hanging out a lot. They would spend the day on the water, they'd leave from the public boat launch, and then on their way back, they would just stop at Dan's house because it was right there. Cam said that Dan lived with his mom and his mom's creepy boyfriend. And that's all that she refers to him as, just creepy boyfriend. Anytime that they would go to Dan's house, this guy was always just right in her face. And she said that there was something about him that just made her skin crawl. Something wasn't right. As the summer goes on, they are spending more and more time at Dan's house, and Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend is starting to weird her out even more. There was one incident in particular that Cam remembers that really stands out to her, but one day they were all over there and they all decide they're hungry, so she actually volunteers to go get food. She said it wasn't boys being rude or anything. She was going to leave them there and she was going to ride by herself. She just needed to decompress and need a little alone time. As Cam is walking up to her car, mom's creepy boyfriend comes out of nowhere, grabs the door handle on the passenger side, and goes to get into the car. He says, "I'll ride with you." Cam says very politely, "That's okay. I can go by myself." She said that this guy's face drops. He just looks at her and says, "A pretty girl like you shouldn't be running around by yourself in the dark." And she said that it was just creepy. Not so much what he said, just the way that he said it, but he just gets out of the car and walks off. About a week after this, they are back at Dan's house, and Cam says this is when she starts to notice that Dan might be a little bit unhinged. They are sitting there, hanging out, everything perfectly fine. Next thing you know, Dan comes out with a pew-pew, aims it into the woods, boom. No warning, no joke. Dan walks into the woods, grabs the squirrel that he had apparently pew-pewed, and comes walking out of the woods with it by its tail like it's like some sort of a trophy. Cam said that she was actually studying ecological conservation, I think she said. So this really didn't sit right with her because she was wondering, what are you doing? Not to mention, he had a pew-pew. Just what are you doing? But she says that that wasn't even the worst part. He sits down, he skins it, cooks it over an open fire, and eats it right in front of him. At this point, Cam is thinking, I'm good on this. Thank you. Shortly after this, her and her boyfriend leave for obvious reasons. They're in the truck, they're riding home, and Cam asks her boyfriend, "What was that?" And he doesn't really have an explanation. And then Cam asks, "So where is Dan's mom?" Because in all this time that they had been at Dan's house and spending time there, they had never seen his mom. Cam's boyfriend says, "I don't know. I really don't know." Well, they had asked about his mom before, and he had always given answers like she's out of town, or she's working, or she's at a friend's house, but just never there, never like saw her with their eyeballs. But after this man eats the squirrel, they decide to distance themselves a little bit from Dan. But unfortunately, that's very difficult because Dan lives right by the public boat launch. And any time that they would take the boat out or bring the boat in, Dan and Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend would just be standing outside. They never went anywhere. They never left. They didn't go to work. Nothing. They just like stood there together. So anytime they would be leaving from bringing the boat in, they'd wave them down. One day after Cam and her boyfriend had taken the boat out, they're bringing the boat back in and they get to kind of like in front of Dan's house and they realize that Dan and Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend are back in like a detached shop on the property. They wave them down. Come on, come on. And they're like, okay. Cam and her boyfriend are pulling their truck back to this detached shop, and Cam says that before she even gets out of the truck, the smell hits her. She said it was unlike anything she has ever smelled before. Rotten, but yet sour, yet like tangy. They pull up to the shop, they get out of the truck, smell hits her even more. She says, "It is stuck in the back of my throat," and she actually ends up gagging. After she does this, Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend walks up to her and is like, "Are you okay, pretty girl?" That's that creep, you know? And she says that after Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend says this to her, Dan actually loses it and goes after his mom's boyfriend. Basically goes off and tells him, "You know that I don't like when you talk to her like that." But Cam said that this was not a protective anger. This was like a possessive anger, if that makes sense. Cam says that Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend doesn't even say anything. He just laughs really creepily and turns around shaking his head and walks back into the shop. That smell is still stuck in the back of Cam's throat. It is making her nauseous. So she tells everyone, listen, I think I'm having like a little seasickness, maybe a little motion sickness from being on the boat all day. I gotta go home. She looks at her boyfriend. They're out of there quickly. Get in the truck, get back on the road. They ride in silence for a few minutes. And Cam says that her boyfriend asks her, did you smell that? Cam says she tells her boyfriend, yes, I did. What was that? And her boyfriend tells her, I don't know. Cam is trying to reason this in her mind, and she is thinking, I watched this man pew a squirrel and then like eat it right then. There's no telling what he has laying around back there. Who knows? But she does say to her boyfriend, that smells like something, like, I feel like we should call the cops or something. And her boyfriend looks at her and says, what are we going to tell them? Hey, our friend's garage smells bad? Cam says she thinks about it a little more and lets it go. They do not encounter Dan or Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend the rest of the summer. They go to a town over to use the boat launch. Something about that evening in particular, something wasn't right, and they just, with everything that had happened, they were done. So Cam and her boyfriend end up going back to college. They don't go to the same college. She said that her boyfriend was about 3 hours away. A couple months go by. Totally uneventful. Then one evening, her boyfriend calls her. He's almost hyperventilating. He can't even breathe. And she is wondering, like, what's going on? Are you okay? Boyfriend ends up telling her they found Dan's mom. Oh yeah, they found Dan's mom in the refrigerator in that detached shop that they had been standing outside of that evening. And she had been there for a while. Come to find out, Dan and Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend had actually unalived Dan's mom and hidden her in the refrigerator. They had continued to collect her disability checks, which is how they survived without going anywhere or ever leaving for work. But Cam said that money was not the motive for this. Dan and Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend were actually in a schmeck-schmummel relationship, and Dan's mom was in the way, so they got rid of her. After Cam hears this, she said, it all makes sense. Every bit of it. The never seeing his mom, them never leaving, the smell. That night when Dan yelled at his mom's creepy boyfriend and sounded possessive, not protective. But Cam stepped back and she looked at the entire situation and realized that Dan had been groomed. This didn't happen overnight. This boyfriend and Dan's mom were together for a long time. This was an adult who took advantage of a vulnerable child, and then things escalated. And Cam says, that's the reason why I'm not using his name. That's the reason why I'm keeping everyone anonymous, because that child was groomed. Because even though Dan was 19, 20 at the time, Dan's mom and this boyfriend had been together for 5+ years. Cam said she has not looked into this case. She doesn't know if he's going to get out, if the creepy boyfriend is going to get out. She doesn't know. She moved across the country and never is going to see Dan or Dan's mom's creepy boyfriend ever again. Thank goodness. But she did say that she does spend a lot of time regretting not making the phone call that she wanted to make when they left Dan's house and smelled that smell. She said, would it have mattered if they had come a couple months earlier versus, when they did and found his mom a bit sooner? She says she doesn't know, but she always took that as a lesson where, like, if something feels off, just make the call. Just make the call. But that is today's story. I don't know what's going on with the algorithm. It feels weird here. So I'm just going to post through it. So I'll be back again tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow is about the Colorado mountains. So I will see you then. Okay, bye.